George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
And it's live from Rochdale, get used to it. In Washington, President Joe Biden green lights the mother of all massacres imminent in the little town of Rafah, which one day will live forever in infamy in the history of modern times. And at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis, a total emergency now exists as the eminent doctors inside are threatened with imminent death by artillery fire in a hospital by the world's most moral army. And in Britain, the British Labour Party literally implodes day by day, hour by hour, in an anti-Semitism scandal entirely of their own making. And here in Rochdale, my opponents are going down like ninepins. I mean, literally going down like no longer in the election. And more to come, I'll warrant. Get your seatbelt strapped in tightly. It's going to be a bumpy night because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Joe Biden keeps claiming that he's at the end of his tether with his mate Benjamin Netanyahu. He keeps leaking to the press that he is increasingly uneasy about the assault on Rafah. Where is Rafah? It's right on the border between Palestine and Egypt. It has a gate between Egypt and thus the outside world and Gaza. I myself have passed through it on dozens of occasions. So have many people in Britain, not the least of them on convoys with me and with the editor of this program, who have taken siege-breaking convoys through that gate many times. It is a town of 150,000 people, except now 1.9 million people are living there, although living is a moot point. Many of them are now dying there. Those that are not yet dead are living on the ground, in the water, in the sewage water, amongst the dogs, the cats and the rats. 1.9 million people living as now thrice or four times displaced people, cascading around a tiny area 25 miles long and at its narrowest 5 miles wide, being ordered from the north to the south, from the south to the east to the west, being moved around as if they were inanimate objects. But they are people. 70% of them are women and children. Just think about that. Just the same as the death toll, the casualty toll. Now well over 100,000 people in Gaza. Around 5% now of the entire population of the Strip are either dead, mutilated, wounded, or missing under the rubble. And when I say wounded, that might suggest that there was a chance that they could be treated. But of the 36 hospitals in Gaza, none are now entirely operative, and only 14 are operating at all. The hospitals have been bombed, besieged, blown up. And the latest is the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. That's the place the Palestinians were told to go to and be safe. It's now completely demolished. The hospital is under siege. Artillery fire is raining down on the hospital, and internationally eminent surgeons and doctors are begging people to contact them somehow by some means so that they can talk to the world about a situation literally of genocide which they are facing. The patients, the doctors, the nurses have nowhere to run, have nowhere to hide. Their hospital is being demolished all around them. But in Rafah, the situation is even more dire, because these 1.9 million people are literally being bombed in their tents, those of them lucky enough to have tents. Inside the tents, the children are sleeping in water. There's water everywhere, but there's not a drop to drink because the water is contaminated and unfit for human consumption. Lying in a tent in water with your family, your children, maybe even your grandchildren too, you are waiting for the bombs to drop upon you, destroy your tent, destroy your family. Many tens of thousands have no tent and are literally living on the cold earth in which they might soon be laid. The artillery fire now raining down on them is matched by naval firepower, firing on them from sea, air power and land power and sea power against 1.9 million people. Refugees entitled to the protection of the international community, protection of which there is none. President Macron of France said today that Israel must cease and desist its assault on Rafah. But he didn't add or else, because there is no or else. It's just wind and maturation. It's just words. They say they're concerned. Cameron, Macron, Biden, all of them keep saying they're concerned, but there's no or else. None of them will do anything, not even demand an immediate ceasefire and the withdrawal of the besieging Israeli forces from the territory, let alone force Israel to accept its international obligations under the Oslo agreements to allow the existence, the creation of a Palestinian state. Remember, if you're old enough, 30 years ago when this was signed on the White House lawn, mind you, the then Prime Minister of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, was then murdered by Netanyahu's supporters. And they didn't just murder Rabin, they murdered the peace process and the Oslo agreements. These Western governments, who are also concerned, how could you not be, in front of your own electorate, in front of your own courts? And whatever happened to the International Court of Justice, which said that plausibly Israel was committing genocide? Do you know how strong a word genocide is or should be? Nothing has been done to enforce that judgment of the International Court of Justice. Israel is still in the Eurovision Song Contest, still in the European Football Championship, still in FIFA, still in the World Cup, still competing with its flag in international tennis competitions, and worse than all of that, Israel is still receiving bombs, missiles, shells, aircraft parts from the United States of America. Israel is still receiving billions of dollars from the United States of America. It is still receiving intelligence overflights by the Royal Air Force of the United Kingdom, flying out of Cypriot territory, which Britain claims is its sovereign territory, in the airbase at Akrotiri. These intelligence overflights are guiding the bombs down on the Palestinian refugees in Gaza. Although what intelligence you need to do that is, of course, again, a moot point. But back to Joe Biden. He keeps saying he's very, very uneasy about this attack on Rafah, but he confirmed in the last day that there will be no sanction upon Israel if they do not do as Biden asked them to do, to conduct their assault on Rafah in a way that does not damage innocent civilian population. Well, of course, there's no way to avoid the damaging of the innocent civilian population. Bombs don't discriminate between the political stripe of the people amongst whom the bombs are falling. There is no way of softly assaulting a tent city of 1.9 million people. But when you tell Netanyahu in advance that whatever it is that you're going to do, there will be no sanction upon you for what it is you're about to do, and which has already started at the edges and now is moving towards the denouement. If you tell the savage assailant that you will not punish him in any way if he does what you say you don't want him to do, then of course that constitutes a green light. Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, opposition leader in Britain, never mind Sunak, he's a wolf. Starmer is a fox. The fox looks like it's smiling, makes you think it might be your friend, but the intention, of course, of both is entirely the same. They intend to eat you. Keir Starmer, a human rights lawyer, a King's Counsel, the highest echelon of British lawyers, has still not said one single word about the judgment of the International Court of Justice 2 weeks ago that his friends, and no bigger friend of Israel exists even in the British Parliament, although, by the way, 8 years ago, I was in a room when he was on the platform calling for Israel to be kicked out of football because of its racism. Funny how 8 years can change things, but no greater friend of Israel exists in the British Parliament than Sir Keir Starmer. But he has not been able to say a word about the ICJ ruling. Starmer said on television, we all saw his lips move, that Israel had the right to cut off electricity and water to 2.3 million people, refugees, entitled to international protection, that they had the right to cut off water and electricity, even though, unless he's fooling us and he's not a King's Counsel, he must have known that they had no such right at all, that such actions are explicitly illegal under international law, under the laws of war, under the Nuremberg tribunals, under the Geneva Conventions. All of these things are declared specifically, explicitly illegal, but Keir Starmer, the leader of the so-called Labour Party, said that Israel was entitled to do so. Well, his party is now imploding. Let me tell you from a Rochdale perspective. This show, get used to it, is coming live from Rochdale. The Labour Party had a candidate against me. I was already beating him soundly. But there's no Labour candidate anymore. Labour has withdrawn from the election, even though this is a Labour seat, has been a Labour seat for decades, even though Labour controls the city council. They no longer have a candidate in the highest profile by-election for many, many years, probably since the last one I beat them in 2012 in Bradford West. I can tell you that without equivocation because I've spent the day being besieged by media wanting to interview me about this by-election. It's very high profile indeed, and the official opposition don't have a candidate. How? Why? Because a secret recording emerged of the Labour candidate making remarks which he described, not me, he described in his mother of all apologies as soon as the recording was broken by a British newspaper. His remarks were ugly, ignorant, stupid, inflammatory, and unwise, and were entirely false. His knees were sore, but for an entire day, for an entire news cycle, the Labour Party accepted his apology because they knew that if they didn't, I was waiting in the wings to be the elected Member of Parliament here in Rochdale. But it soon became clear that they were unable to hold that line because Keir Starmer came to power in the Labour Party, blaming his predecessor for presiding over a culture of anti-Semitism. And Corbyn was kicked out of the Labour Party by his successor, imagine. And Corbyn's allies were kicked out of the Labour Party by his successor. And thousands of people were expelled was suspended from the Labour Party because of their association with Jeremy Corbyn and his alleged culture of anti-Semitism. Now, of course, the anti-Semitism was a scam. What they meant was anti-Israelism. What they meant was criticism of Israel. And what Corbyn should have done is exactly what I'm doing, which is to say, unequivocally, never retreat from it, don't budge an inch. Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are two entirely different things. And if you mix them up, you run the risk of anti-Semites getting in under the fence. Because if everybody is called an anti-Semite, well, have you ever heard of the boy who cried wolf? The wolf was real. Anti-Semitism is real. But if you accuse mild-mannered Jeremy Corbyn of being an anti-Semite, then you might as well say everybody who has any criticism of Israel to make is an anti-Semite. And even my Labour opponent, who's been forced out of the race, in the published broadcast, he may have said other things. Some people say he did. And if he did, let's see them. Let's hear them. And if he said anything anti-Semitic, let's condemn what he said and condemn him for saying it. But in the published account of what he said, which was stupid, false, ignorant, and all the other things I said, there was no anti-Semitism at all. It was a stupid conspiracy theory that Israel had deliberately allowed the attack on October 7th to happen and brought about the destruction of hundreds of Israeli citizens. That's wrong. It's untrue. It's definitely inflammatory. It's incendiary. It's ignorant. It's false. But it's not anti-Semitic, because to attack Netanyahu's government is not anti-Semitism. It's anti-Netanyahuism. It's anti-Israelism. And then the next night, they suspended yet another Labour MP and candidate in a nearby constituency for comments he made at the same meeting that my Labour opponent was secretly recorded. This fellow is a Blairite called Graham Jones. He has supported Keir Starmer's line of cutting off water and electricity. Publicly, he has done so. He is recorded saying the two words, fucking Israel, and saying that people who go from Britain to fight for the Israeli armed forces and then come back to Britain should be locked up. He said that it was illegal for them to do so. It actually isn't, but ought to be illegal. But again, his published remarks are not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic to say the words fucking Israel. It's not anti-Semitic to say that people who go and fight for a foreign army should be locked up and put on trial on their return. I never thought I'd end up defending Graham Jones, whom I loathe with every fibre of my being. But what he said was not anti-Semitic at all. Now a third guy, third MP in the south of England, is up on a similar charge. A councillor, Councillor Dad in Lancashire, is under threat of suspension for the same thing. Look, why don't we suspend all candidates in all parties, in all elections, until Israel approves them? Is that the democracy we want? And we have to ask ourselves, why is the entire political class in Britain in thrall to a tiny little country 2,200 miles away from here, and nothing can be said by anybody here which they don't like? What is it? What hold is it that this little country has on our politics in Western countries? We all know in America it's about money, but the sums of money here in Britain are paltry. By American standards, you'd laugh. You can only spend about £14,000 in a general election in one constituency. Are these people enthralled to Israel for 3, 4, or 5,000 pounds, in which case they're precious cheap? If other lobbyists knew how cheap they were, they'd be moving in and getting a piece of the action. I don't know what the situation is. I don't know why they are so terrified of Israel that they're ready to sack their own candidates in the middle of a by-election when I am breathing down their neck. That's how scared of Israel they are. And when this is all over, and I fully anticipate it will be over with a couple of new letters after my name, we have to ask ourselves how, why, when British politics became effectively outsourced to Netanyahu's Israel, whose pleasure or displeasure dictates who can stand, who can win, who can be elected, and what policy they can follow. Now, I've already gone over my time. First, there were 11 candidates against me. The Green Party first fell over Islamophobic tweets that would turn your hair white if you read them, and which showed the level of due diligence the Greens employed in picking their candidate against me. The Labour candidate has fallen, and a third candidate may very well fall. At this rate, I'll have nobody to beat on the 29th of February, and some of you fools say there's no God. It's the mother of all talk shows. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now we're running a poll, as always. Which organisation has Israel harmed more? I don't know why they haven't put the Labour Party in that list, but there's only 2 listed. One is the International Court of Justice, whose ruling has been contemptuously ignored, or the United Nations. How does Israel continue to be in the United Nations when it's killed hundreds of United Nations officials in the last 130 days? So which organisation has Israel harmed more, the ICJ or the UN? You can vote on Telegram. My Telegram channel is t.me/George Galloway. Do follow me there. On my Twitter, do follow me there. On the YouTube community poll and on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream or on Facebook or on any platform which allows you to, please share this broadcast with all of your friends, all of your contacts. Now, if you want to comment on anything you hear or don't hear on this show that you think you ought to have, if you're in the US or Canada, it's toll free. Here's the number, +1 844 944 3344. If you're in the UK or Ireland, again, free of charge, it's 08 081 96 5522. If you're in the rest of the world, It's 0044 203 966 2625. Now, email from Dr. Tolstoyevsky. Hi, Gigi, you've outdone yourself tonight. You delivered the mother of all monologues. What you said is spot on, and I congratulate you. Best wishes, Dr. Tolstoyevsky. Thank you, Doctor. Most kind. The first guest this evening, been a friend of mine for 40 years. He's a refugee. He was a refugee in Gaza, and now he's a refugee in Britain, though I suspect they've let him in and he's a British citizen now. He happens to be the Arab world's preeminent journalist and broadcaster. Please welcome Bari Atwan. Abdel Bari, welcome to the show again tonight. All joking aside, your people face the gravest possible circumstances. Tell us first of all about Rafah, what's happening there, and what the worst case scenario is.
You know, Brother George, to be honest, my family now residing in Rafah. You know, I was born in a refugee camp there, as you know, and I'm extremely worried because the Israelis are threatening to actually bomb Rafah and maybe kill, hundreds of thousands of people there because they don't want the Palestinian alive to be alive, and they want to force them to actually immigrate to Sinai in Egypt, which has nothing to do with Sinai, nothing to do with Egypt. So people are, to be honest, starving. There is a famine now in Rafah. You know, I was told by my friends and my family there that people collapse in the streets because they haven't eaten for 3 days, 4 days, 2 days. So, and especially children, there is no milk for the children at all. This is the Israeli mercy. You know, this most westernized state on the Middle East. So it is very, very dreadful situation. People, they don't know where to go. You know, where they want to actually send them now. Okay, they sent us from Asdod, our hometown, to Gaza. And then now they want to send us, they don't know, to Egypt. But Egypt is closing the border completely. And why should they take us, you know? And so I think the next trip, the next evacuation will be to the moon, maybe to the Gibraltar, who knows? Because they don't know what to do with the Palestinian. And unfortunately, Britain is supporting this kind of atrocities by the Israeli. And the same thing happened in the United States. Until now, we haven't heard a single word from Biden. After 4 months of massacre, genocide, ethnic cleansing, we haven't heard from him one word that stop the war, stop fighting, the ceasefire. Never they said that. This is the head of the liberal world. This is the champion of human rights values. So people, honestly, people in Rafah, you know, they don't have water, they don't have electricity, they don't have food. Even animal food is not available now. They finished it. And there is no any aids. Have you heard, Brother George, have you heard in any war, you know, they bombed hospitals? Have you heard of that? You know, have you heard that they stopped all, all shipments of medical needed by these hospitals? Have you heard of little children operated at, you know, without any kind of anesthetic? This is happening in Gaza. And the last thing which I want to refer to, you know, you talked about United Nations organization, UNRWA, for example. I was born in, as I said, in a refugee camp, and I was educated in UNRWA school. I was treated on UNRWA hospitals. I was actually fed by UNRWA human aids. So now, you know, suddenly the Israeli, they want to kick UNRWA out of Gaza. And what about the people? How, you know, they want people to starve to death. People go and took refuge to UNRWA schools, UNRWA hospitals, hoping that this is United Nations organization and this building will protect them. They thought the Israeli wouldn't go, you know, that down and go and bomb schools and the people who took refuge in schools and hospitals. So situation, honestly, is very bad. How the international community, how the Western world, the world of human rights values, how they accept people to starve to death in Gaza. And there are more than 2,000 vans of human aids waiting on the other side of the border in the Egyptian territory. Why they don't allow them to get in? Why, United States don't say, who are talking about human rights, to say that these should enter and those people should not die of famine. But it doesn't happen at all. There is no school for children, no food for children, no treated, no milk, no safety. There is no place which is safe now in any part of Gaza Strip. They kill them. Journalists, about 150 journalists were massacred by the Israeli because they don't tend to know the international community to know what is happening in Gaza. This kind of massacre which is taking place. This is a brief, characterization of our brief picture of what is happening in my refugee camp. And all refugee camps in Gaza. And Gaza is the biggest refugee camps in the world.
Some of the viewers will be wondering why these 2,000 trucks outside the border, lined up along the road, many kilometers of trucks, are not allowed to go in. Why Egypt doesn't open the gate and allow them in. Is the reason because Israel would bomb the trucks if they went in without Israeli approval?
Yes, they did. They did bomb the trucks before. And they did bomb, actually, Egypt sort of monitoring tower. And Egypt doesn't want to fight a war with the Israeli because Egypt is in a very drastic economical situation. But I think when it reaches to this stage, I think there will be a war. Because the Israeli would like to occupy Philadelphia corner of Philadelphia, actually border between Gaza and Egypt, and in order to actually suffocate the Palestinian people, the Gazan people, or replace them again, send them to Sinai. So it is very dangerous. Egypt warned the Israeli that if you do this, actually, we will freeze a Camp David agreement, so-called peace agreement. And actually, if you occupy this border line, we will fight you. We wouldn't let you in. So they are actually humiliating everybody there. And they are seeking wars. And why they are doing this? Because they are 100% sure the Americans are supporting them. This is, Biden supporting them. That who actually sent tanks, sent warplanes, sent ammunition to Israel, who sent $17 billion immediately to Israel. It is Biden and his government. So they are 100% sure that the American will be on their side. And the American encouraging them to massacre people, to actually ethnic cleansing them. And this is the problem. Yeah, it is, all the problems in the Middle East because of the Israeli aggression. Middle East without Israel will be in peace. They are used by the American in order to destabilize the whole region. Why? Because I don't know. Is it racism? We don't know. It is hatred. We don't know. So, but it is without the American, without the British, I talk about the government, without the Western world, Israel wouldn't be actually that aggressive. Wouldn't be able to commit all these kinds of crimes and ethnic cleansing. So this is the problem. To be honest, George, let me just half a minute. When I came to this country, it was a pleasant country. It was freedom of expression used to be in its best. Imagine that. Everybody talking about Rafah. Everybody talk about Gaza. And I am from Rafah. I'm from Gaza. I used to be actually, 24 hours at the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, CNN. Imagine that. Nobody called me to listen to the other side story at all. And they know Bari Atwan very well. I used to, 45 years, I used to vote for the Labour Party because this Labour Party used to be with the oppressed people. And twice I didn't, I wouldn't. One, I didn't when Tony Blair, your friend, was there. And then now when Starmer is there, simply because I cannot believe this is the Labour Party which I voted for all my life. And I took my children to vote for them. So what is happening to this country? What is happening? I'm surprised. They used to be very kind. They used to be very nice to us, especially the Palestinians. They understand our problem. They understand our suffering. But now, when you say to them it is famine, I don't know, the government, the conservative government now, they do nothing but supporting the Israeli massacres against my people, against my family. 30 of my family and relatives are killed, bombed by the Israeli, George, until now. And I don't know if they bomb Rafah again, because most of my family, most of my relatives are in Rafah now. I may lose 100, 200 people of my family, and also the children, the old people, women. So why the world is silent about this? Why they know there is a famine there? And also, what amazed me, United States, when they cut off all their financial aid to UNRWA, the United Nations organization, which is helping the refugee in Palestine, they cut Britain the same. And other countries, France the same. Why did you cut it off? They said, they believe the Israeli, when the Israeli said that, some of those UNRWA staff are cooperating with Hamas. And they did not, submit one proof that those UNRWA staff are cooperating with Hamas. Until now, UNRWA is saying, where are your proof? But American, British, French, all they believe them immediately, and they cut off all the human aid, which means by the end of this month, it will be bankrupt completely. No, they prevent all food to come even under the banner of UNRWA to Gaza Strip. So it is famine. It is unbelievable. To be honest, Brother George, I am really, really shocked. And I can't sleep, to be honest. When that phone rings and I see Gaza number, I really shiver, because I know there will be bad news. Your cousin is killed, your nephew killed, your relative killed. So this is the problem. Unbelievable. Nobody is paying attention to this human tragedy. And they are saying anti-Semitic. If I criticize Israel, say Israel is barbaric and killing my relative and my brothers and my sister, Bari Atwan is anti-Semitism. He should not appear on the BBC. He should not appear on ITV. He should not appear in Channel 4. He is, he's wicked. He is criticizing Israel. So imagine that. I used to write for The Guardian. I used to write for Daily Mail. I used to write Daily Mirror. They begged me to write for them. Nobody say hello. I don't care. But, at least they shouldn't support massacres against my own people in Gaza.
Very powerful indeed, Abdel. Bari Atwan, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. That interview will live long, I suspect. Which organization has Israel harmed more, the ICJ or the UN? It's a pity you've got to choose between them, but do so for the purposes of this poll. I'll be right back.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Which organization has Israel harmed more, the ICJ or the UN? I would have added a third option, the Labour Party, but we'll be talking to a man who knows more about that than me, Asa Winstanley, after the hour. But now, for the rest of the hour, it's your turn. Jenny is on the phone in California. Who wouldn't like to go to California? We all are now. Jenny, we're with you. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. Thanks for all you do. My question is, I'm concerned by all the commentators continue to go on and on about Israel, and I really think we're past that. I think really it's the United States that is now 100% responsible for this genocide, and I think that's the way it needs to be addressed, is that the United States, this could not continue without the United States.
Jenny, it may have been dementia talking, but Joe Biden actually called it our operation in Rafah on stage in public this very week.
Yeah, that was an accident, obviously, on his part. But I feel like
it was a Freudian
all
slip.
Of us, perhaps. Yeah, I feel like the United States is the responsible one. Israel's just the attack dog at this point. And to be calling out Israel, yes, it's obnoxious, it's horrific what they're doing, but they couldn't continue without the United States. So it's ultimately the United States.
So the big question, $64,000 question, Jen, is why? Why is Biden doing this, even though half of his own voters think that Israel is committing genocide, and another 20% are not sure? So why?
Well, I'm certainly no geopolitical analyst, but I would venture to say that, number one, the war machine in the United States is getting obscenely rich from this. And two, I understand that there's oil in Gaza, and that this would probably be the primary reason.
And there's nobody standing against it, of course. Zion Don, the Republican leader, Donald Trump, he's just as mad for Israel as Joe Biden.
Exactly. He's insane. They're both insane. Yeah, there's no help there. No help with the Republicans.
How did it come to be that two people are running for president and both of them, in your view, are insane? How did we get here, Jenny?
Well, I think that the citizens, unbeknownst to us, I don't dislike Americans, but the United States government has really gone off the rails and is clearly no longer doing anything in the interest of the citizens. It's purely for profit, purely for, and willing to kill for profit.
Whatever happened to America first? It's Israel first, Ukraine first, everybody first except America. It's America last. Anyway, Jenny, thank you for that call. Morn's Lad says the Rafah crossing belongs to Egypt and Gaza, not Israel. So Egypt can go in and out of it with the consent of Gazans. Instead, it crawls on its belly to try not to upset Israel. GDNPB says the fact that this genocide is allowed to be happening in 2024 gives me very little hope for humanity. And the fact that our governments are helping it to occur makes me sick. On the line from Ireland, from Belfast, my old friend Fra. Fra, welcome back.
Thank you very much, George. Happy St. Valentine's Day.
Yes, the wife is just saying this is our St. Valentine's Day on the mother of all talk shows. But she's very happy about it. She wouldn't choose anywhere else.
I'm sure she's 100% correct. George, I've just a couple of comments to make. I won't take up much of your time. Firstly, you mentioned convoys earlier on. I was honoured to be able to go on your convoy, Viva Palestina 5 in 2010 to Gaza, and again, Bradford to Gaza in 2014. And I had lunch with a mutual friend today, Nabil, who sends his regards. He said I got on the show to say hello to you.
Very good.
Yep, 100%. So, good. George, what I'm really phoning up about is there's a campaign here in Ireland calling on Irish politicians not to attend the St. Patrick's Day celebrations in the White House. A lot of people here feel that if Irish politicians go to Washington, that while they are drowning their shamrocks and having selfies with genocidal Joe Biden, Palestinians will be drowning in their own blood or suffocating slowly to death under the rubble. Now, part of this kind of duplicity, I'm going to call out here all the Irish politicians, but specifically Sinn Féin. I've seen Sinn Féin members at political rallies, both in the crowd and on the platforms, standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And just two quick examples of this duplicity. When people in Belfast City Council called for the removal of the Israeli ambassador to Ireland, all the Sinn Féin elected councillors abstained from the vote. And just recently, at the Europa Hotel, there's videos of this out on the internet, two Palestinians, one from the West Bank, I believe, and one from Gaza, got up to engage with this Sinn Féin conference audience at the Europa Hotel. Now, they weren't asked as speakers. They more or less got up and wanted to challenge this idea that Irish politicians would be seen to be endorsing Joe Biden and his genocidal policies in Gaza. When they went to speak, they were told to get out and to leave now. Now, that's the type of thing, if a pro-Palestinian protester stood up in front of Tony Blair or Starmer or Rishi Sunak or Biden and called for an end to the genocide in Gaza, you would expect those people to get up and say, get out, this isn't your meeting, have your own meeting, leave now. For Sinn Féin to do that in Belfast, when they have claimed all the way through their political different manifestations that they stand side by side with the Palestinian people, to stab them in the back like that is unforgivable. And to tell people here,
well,
let
me respond. Let me respond to it. I'm not a supporter of Sinn Féin, but I would have to say, as a matter of honour, that they have done a fantastic work for Palestine over many decades. Actually, it was an article of faith, and you can see it on the murals in West Belfast, of the extent to which the Irish and Palestinian causes were linked. And one of the reasons, I think the main reason, why Ireland is so overwhelmingly in support of Palestine, right up to including the President of the Republic, is because of the work done by Irish Republicans over many decades, including the Sinn Féin in its various iterations, as you said. But they've made a very big mistake in accepting this invitation to the White House to take pictures or be pictured with Joe Biden. I highlighted this on the show when Joe Biden was in Ireland, and people that I respect and who should have known better were grinning into the lens for selfies with Joe Biden prior to October 7, but of course after so many massacres, which you and I have had to run convoys to try and bring some small relief to. So they shouldn't have done that when Biden was in Ireland, this playing along with this, I'm an Irish man, when in fact he's not, with Joe Biden, showering him with the shamrocks. That was repugnant to me, and I said so on the show. And they've made a big mistake in accepting this invitation to go to the White House, and I think they are losing support as a result of it. And that's a pity, because although I'm not a supporter of Sinn Féin, I want them to win, because when they win, Irish freedom and independence will have been won. And that's a cause that I will never leave as long as God gives me breath, and that I have supported all of my life. So I'm very sad, not angry, but sad that Sinn Féin have done this. And even at this 11th hour, I urge them to reconsider. Thank you, Fra. Christine Peach says, maybe Israel has the Epstein videos on many politicians. Maybe he does. Ethel Benny says, George, this is why we need you back in Parliament. You're fearless and have a heart of gold. I know you will put great pressure on this incompetent, warmongering and evil members of Parliament. Thank you, Ethel. Anthony Wedgwood says, everyone on the left or anti-establishment need to unite around one candidate to unseat Starmer at the next election. Nothing would be sweeter. Well, that candidate is a standout. Andrew Feinstein, the former ANC MP in South Africa, a Jewish man, the son of Holocaust survivors, an eloquent and powerful figure. He should be the one candidate standing against Keir Starmer at the general election, and he might even beat him. Let's go to the lines. Wow, how can I resist? Dundee, my own hometown, where Duncan is on the line. Go ahead, Duncan.
Hi, George. Thanks for taking my call. I'd like to pick up on something you mentioned earlier in your opening monologue there, where you were expressing puzzlement that due to campaign donation limitations in the UK political system, that politicians can be bought so cheaply, by lobbyists, whether it's Israeli lobbyists or any other lobbyist. And I think you compared it to the enormous amounts in the US that they can pay. And I think it's worth pointing out that the US has campaign limitations also, and they're probably right in line with British limitations. But the Supreme Court about 10 years ago passed Citizens United, which allowed what's called dark money or soft money, where if you don't donate directly to the candidate, you can give to the party, or there's different ways to get money to that candidate that can escape the limitations. And an example of that would be during the Trump administration. There was a gentleman called Sheldon Adelson, who was a very wealthy man, and he donated $250 million in one election cycle. And right before Trump recognized occupied Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And to show you how egregious this is, this bypass of the limitations, not only did he encourage Trump to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he actually bought the ambassador's old home, the American ambassador's old house in Tel Aviv, to make sure he could never move back into it. So my question for you is, does the British system, and you've been a candidate and you've been a party member in Labour and Respect, does the British system also have a way to get dark money or soft money to candidates that escape the direct limitations on individual donations?
It doesn't. Thank you for that very erudite call, but it doesn't. If someone spends money which has the clear intention or result of increasing votes for me, then that is attributed to me as if I spent it myself. So these PACs, as they're called, political action committees, that do the corruption in America would not be able to operate here. Of course, you can give money to the party, but even that has to be registered, and even that doesn't add up to the quantum that would cause, on the face of it, an infatuation bordering on obsession with Israel and Labour. The quantum of donations to Labour in all its forms, support for shadow ministers, donations to the party, donations to candidates, the quantum is around £250,000. Now, whilst I myself would love to have £250,000, American viewers will be laughing at the fact that you can buy a political party, one of the two biggest political parties in the state, that you could buy them for £250,000. That's why I say there must be something else. I don't know what the something else is, but it is otherwise inexplicable that Labour has become totally obsessed with Israel, expelling even its own candidates in the middle of a by-election where I am the opposition, expelling them, withdrawing support from them because they said something nasty and stupid about Israel. That is inexplicable to me. Not explicable entirely by money, because they must be able to get millions because of all the big sellouts that they've made to private business, to capitalism. They must be able to raise millions from others. I'm sure Saudi Arabia would give them 10 times $250,000, 100 times $250,000. But they are bought and sold for money, really? That amount of money? How cheap can you be? Thanks, Duncan. In response to Fra's call, the Risen People era say Sinn Féin threw out an activist from Palestine for protesting the PLO reps there that day. I don't know about that hotel occasion, the Europa that Fra was talking about, so I can't comment on it. Caroline, I'm calling Sinn Féin tomorrow to urge them not to go and see Biden. And Oliver Law, 02, says Sinn Féin gave their support to the Zionazis in Ukraine. Here's Elliot on the line from Florida on Unarwa. Go ahead, Elliot.
Oh, thank you, George. Glad to talk to you. I wanted to bring up 3 events that occurred in the last few days and get your reactions to see whether that it might mean some action or a change or shift in the dynamics in Europe and elsewhere. But as far as the questions you were asking about why, those questions have to be answered. You know, I think the Epstein factor can't be ignored, and the fact that all of these intelligence agencies are joined. Israel knows all the secrets. But anyway, that's another story. There was on Sunday, I believe, an UNRWA and EU press conference, joint press conference held in Belgium. The chief Lazzarini of UNRWA and Joseph Borrell speaking from his garden. Both of them stressing to the press that there was no evidence for the allegations, that they were just allegations, and Lazzarini even bristled at a reporter and pointed out the number of UNRWA facilities that were bombed or being used by Israel. And Borrell, in a mocking tone of the U.S. and the West, said, of course, he reiterated to stop providing arms, but his mocking was mimicking the West, saying, please, please, stop killing, please, protect. He said, stop asking and do something. And he said, where do you want these people to go to the moon? That's the one shift, or at least the boldness that is not usually seen. The second thing is the meeting that just occurred between Erdogan and Sisi after 12 years of antagonism. And top on the agenda is Gaza and what that could imply. And then the third is that South Africa recently, just yesterday, went to the ICJ again with an urgent plea for them to take action. Do you think any of this is going to have any effect?
Well, I don't know about the Erdogan-Sisi meeting because I'm out election campaigning all day. I didn't catch that news. I welcome it. Anything which brings about a situation where Arab and Muslim leaders are toughening their stance, emboldening each other, and maybe finally doing something rather than just saying something, I welcome. But I haven't seen any details about it. The South African move, South Africa is now the moral center of the world. South Africa is the leader of the free world. And I'm very, very happy about that. But it is South Africa that took the case to the ICJ when apparently nobody else would. And it is South Africa that is now before the court right now in the morning who will be pressing for an emergency injunction. But of course, the Israelis will treat that with the same contempt that they treated the original ICJ finding of a plausible case of genocide. But it's still worth doing because it makes it more difficult for the Western governments supporting Israel to ignore an emergency, immediate injunction on Israel to cease and desist its attack on Rafah. Of course, even if these Western governments wanted to, and that's in doubt, the question is whether they are able to now rein in their attack dog. On the face of it, Israel is the dog, the Western countries are the handlers. But at what point does the dog move out of control of its handlers? That, I think, is a moot point at this stage. So, Elliot, I thank you for your call. It's the time for a break before Abdullah. Let's hear from Abdullah in London on Palestine. It's only right. Abdullah, go ahead.
Hello there, Mr. George. How are you? You okay?
By the grace of God, good. Thank you. What would you like to say?
Alhamdulillah. Please forgive me. Trying not to take too much of your time straight into it. Please forgive me. I'm a bit anxious first time on a call like this, but Bismillah. Would you, you know, in terms of Palestine, etc., I've been reading some of the comments. It's probably, you don't really hear such an argument. Please forgive me if it is not so on such things, etc. And it is, the truth is silence. I'm not saying I know the truth or etc. We're all on the truth to a certain degree. But would you think that, please, it might be misunderstood, and that is the problem, because as Muslims we do believe in Jesus, Moses, and all of them. Please forgive me, but Bismillah. Like, the solution has not been given a chance. It has won in the end, but what have we done? It's just like people take pride in nationhood, and sorry to say, the political system of the world. Are you still there, Brother George?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Forgive me. It's all a setup from opposition parties. It's all a show. Sorry. God bless you. You know, everyone's actions are intentions, as the Prophet Muhammad said. But it's like all Tavistock Institute. It's social psychosis. It goes back to our common enemy, Satan, to the beginning. He's from smokeless fire, we're from clay. He conquers and divides, and it's all a show. Even Satan himself can tell the truth, but he's known to be a liar. So it's all to do with Palestine, and then will it...
Well, there's no doubt, there's no doubt, Abdullah, that Satan is in the world, walking down many a street. That much is clear. Thanks for the call. I need to take a break now. Indeed, I'm 3 minutes late in doing so. But there's a top guest coming up, Asa Winstanley, right after this. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, our poll tonight, which organization has Israel harmed more, ICJ or UN? It's a pretty convincing, overwhelming decision that the UN has been harmed more by Israel. 17,000 people have voted. You can vote until about quarter to the hour, so get your vote in now. A reminder of the phone numbers in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's toll free. In the UK and Ireland, it's free of charge, 08081 965522, and the worldwide number 44203 966 2625. Now, Asa Winstanley is a celebrated investigative journalist and podcaster. His work is of the first rank, and he's an expert on Labour and Israel. So he's the best placed man to answer my question, asked rhetorically earlier, why? Asa Winstanley, why are Labour so obsessed with Israel? That's the $64,000 question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I was listening to some of the discussion with the callers earlier in your program, George, and yeah, I mean, look, it's a big question. I mean, there's a long history of this, as you alluded to, and I get into some of it in my book, Weaponizing Antisemitism, which is about the Jeremy Corbyn period and how anti-Semitism was weaponized against that movement during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. But it's got actually a much longer history than that. You know, it can go right back to the conception of Zionism as really a specific form of a certain strand of evangelical Christianity, whereby it's really a kind of an anti-Jewish theology, really, whereby the Jews, quote unquote, have to supposedly return to Palestine before the end times can come. And this, you know, evangelical Christianity doesn't have the political clout in this country that it does in the United States, but it used to. It used to, you know, ministers and prime ministers used to believe in biblical literalism, a certain form of biblical literalism, and so on and so forth. And so it kind of starts there. There's a long history of it, and there's a long history of the Labour Party in its really more colonial phase, its more colonial era, where it was not only supporting British imperialism around the world, but actually running governments which ran British Empire around the world, as you know, George. And so the Labour Party's support for Zionism is part of that long kind of malign history. But it's still, you know, that doesn't explain everything. You're right. You know, the discussion that you were having earlier was interesting, because you raised the point of money, and you make a really good point about how the kinds of money that the Labour politicians are being basically bought for it's nothing compared to the money in American politics. Yeah, it's a really fair point. Like for example, Keir Starmer, we know one of the people he was bought by was, I mean, not the only one, but one of the people he was bought by was Trevor Chin, who's a leading pro-Israel lobbyist, is known to fund many pro-Israel lobby groups such as Labour Friends of Israel, and that money went to his office. I believe, though, it was only about £20,000. Which, you know, exactly, it's not a small amount of money, but in terms of political campaigning, it's not really very much. And so there must be more to it, and there's a lot that I think we don't know about, and you know, a lot of it is to do with moral blackmail. You know, that we've seen this kind of witch hunt and hysteria really dredged up against the whole Corbyn era, against you yourself, as you well know, George, and against anyone who's really campaigned for Palestinian rights in this country for many, many decades. And, you know, the weaponization of anti-Semitism is really as old as the state of Israel itself. And the irony that we're seeing now with the shambles in Rochdale, the Labour Party shambles in Rochdale, is that this anti-Semitism witch hunt that was mainly being prosecuted against the left and the Palestine solidarity movement within the Labour Party and outside the Labour Party over the last few years has now even expanded to the Labour Party right. You know, this is the irony that they've
the Blairites.
The Blairites, and your former Labour opponent, who's now been suspended in Rochdale. I mean, I didn't agree with what he said, but it wasn't anti-Semitic. You know, it was about his. I mean, look, I haven't heard the actual full tape of what he was alleged to have said, and it wouldn't surprise me if the Daily Mail misrepresented it somewhat. But as it was reported, I didn't agree with it. But it's about a state. It's about the state of Israel. It's not about
exactly
Jews.
And it's actually what many Israeli newspapers have themselves said. These newspapers like Haaretz and so on that are against Netanyahu, they've said similar things, and they are Israeli newspapers. But the
New York Times had
this
a report about
is a
it
novel. The New York Times also did. Which is basically an Israeli newspaper, but that's another matter. This new turn is interesting me. Is it just the case that they built a Frankenstein monster around the weaponization of anti-Semitism, and it cannot now be stopped? Why would someone like Graham Jones, a man who refused to serve under Corbyn, who backed the cutting off of water and electricity in the Gaza, who, according to Ed Balls, who should know on British television this morning, is definitely not anti-Israel. Now he's suspended. I mean, where does this stop? Can it be stopped?
I mean, you're right. It's an interesting dynamic. I mean, look, we're both laughing a bit. I mean, I can't help a little bit of schadenfreude. I mean, I was saying years ago on Twitter that that not only will this go against kind of the weak part of the pro Corbyn left that kind of gave way to it, but ultimately it will end up going against the Labour Party right, and that's kind of what we're seeing played out now. And you're right. It's interesting. I mean, I think it is a kind of Frankenstein monster. It has a life of its own. It's something that it seems like only a couple of days ago they were saying for Azhar Ali, they would the pro-Israel groups were saying, well, it's bad what he said, but the alternative is Galloway, so we have to stand by it. But then it's got this life of its own, whereby the Labour Party higher ups have made all these commitments to doing whatever the Israel lobby says. The pro-Israel groups are ordering them to do, and at this point it is, well, he said something anti-Semitic, as they claim, although it's not, and so they have to get rid of him. And it seems to have this own internal logic. And it kind of speaks to this issue of what you were saying before, of Israel is the attack dog of Western imperialism in a lot of ways, but it's exactly that question: at what point does it become out of control and start to bite the hand that feeds a little bit? And I think we're seeing a little bit of that in the Labour Party at the moment. Yeah.
These secret recordings are, of course, haunting other people. I can't give you details, but another of my opponents is about to fall victim to something similar.
Okay.
And in a way, therefore, we're in a situation where other people, rather than the voters, are picking the MP. That's harmful for democracy, this obsession, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this very similar process to what we saw through all the Corbyn years, where something would be leaked to a newspaper, a right-wing newspaper usually, not always, quite often the Jewish Chronicle, the very pro-Israel right-wing newspaper, and about somebody prominent who was perceived, either was or was perceived to be close to Corbyn or pro-Corbyn figure in the party. That would then be leaked to the press, leaked to the Jewish Chronicle, whoever got it, and then the Jewish Chronicle or whoever would then put that to the Labour Party, and the Labour Party, instead of saying, we don't comment on individual cases, as they would do for other issues, perhaps, they instantly suspend the people and say, this is very serious, and there's a suspension pending further investigation. And it would have to be the very slightest form of criticism against Israel, or even just, it got to the end and this, again, something I cover in a lot of detail in the book, but by the end it got to the point where if you were just asking for evidence, like, where's the evidence of this so-called institutional anti-Semitism, this systemic discrimination against Jewish people within the Labour Party, if you were asking for evidence of that in itself was said to be evidence of anti-Semitism, which is a crazy, Kafkaesque catch-22 situation. And it is really McCarthyite. It is dangerous. Like you said, it is really dangerous to democracy. The people are not, like you said, the people are not choosing who's going to be the MPs, who's going to be the candidate for the MPs. There's these, political and media elites, essentially, that are choosing who are going to be the candidates for MPs and who are going to be our political leaders. So, it is a very, I hesitate to use the word, but it's wicked. It's a very wicked, in the old-fashioned sense of the word. It's a very, it's a very bad and evil process, really.
Well, Asa, I've been in politics a long time, as you know, longer than you've been alive. I was in Parliament for almost 30 years. I recognize the era that you described of Labour's infatuation with Zionism, with its evangelical roots, and the kind of Fabian idea that Israel was going to be a progressive form of colonialism, with kibbutzim and the Histadrut having its own bank, and so on, the trade union having its own bank. I lived through that, although they always tolerated the presence of people mainly on the right of the Labour Party, like Andrew Folds and others, who took a pro-Palestinian, or they would be then described as pro-Arab. That was always tolerated on the Labour benches. But Ed Miliband's era, himself Jewish, a father who was an intellectual titan, Ralph Miliband of left-wing politics, he was Jewish, but not Zionist, and even he was attacked. I remember the B-list actress, Maureen Lipman, who she resigned from the Labour Party over Ed Miliband agreeing that Labour wanted to recognise a Palestinian state. So it kind of predated Corbyn in that way. I'm just wondering if you had a notion, or if in your book you chart when this infatuation became, what I call it, an obsession.
Yeah, I do get into a lot of that in the book, and I do mention the precedent of Ed Miliband, and it's a really interesting history that you raised there, and I do get into some of it, and I chart the history of some of that. And the Maureen Lipman thing is funny because that she allegedly left the Labour Party for the first time during the Ed Miliband era, precisely because of his, as you said, support for a Palestinian state. And then that was said to be, there's, an anti-Semitism problem for Ed Miliband. Not to the same extent that there was for Jeremy Corbyn, but it was there, definitely. But Maureen Lipman then, 4 years later, in the 2019 election repeated the trick of abandoning the Labour Party because of Jeremy Corbyn, what she claimed was anti-Semitism. So it is, it's a real puzzle that the media has this sort of really short-term memory. I think as well that it's an interesting question of when did it start. Like you can trace it back to one turning point was 1956, of course, which was what the Palestinians and the Egyptians call the tripartite aggression against Egypt, where France, Britain, and Israel conspired to invade Egypt. In this, it was complicated, but essentially that's what it boiled down to. It was a tripartite invasion of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, and so forth. By
the Suez
Israel.
Crisis.
Yes, exactly, the Suez Crisis, as it's known in the West, and ultimately that was rolled back by the Americans, ironically, who weren't as fully on board with Israel as they are now, and that very slight difference. There was then a slight difference of opinion between Labour and the Conservatives over that, because the Conservatives obviously were taking part in that invasion, as you know, but the Labour Party didn't disagree with it. I mean, you know all this history, George, but it's interesting for your viewers, I'm sure, that the Labour Party opposed it, not on principle, but on on certain narrow grounds of it being not in the best British interest. No time to get into the whole thing of it. I get into it a little bit in the book, but then that set about the first break within the Labour Party grassroots and in certain political activist sectors and the pro-Israel side, and that's when Labour Friends of Israel was actually founded. Was after the so-called Suez Crisis. And so, there's a history of these pro-Israel groups. And in a way, ironically, although they're very strong, they're very influential, they're very powerful, they got a lot of money behind them. We don't know how much. This is another difference with America. There's far less transparency with these groups like Labour Friends of Israel, Conservative Friends of Israel. We know they have a lot of money, but we don't know exactly how much. Ironically, in some ways, the fact that they're needed is kind of a sign of weakness, certainly on the popular level, because it shows that if it wasn't for all these kind of groups, they wouldn't have the same level of support that they do.
It sounds a fascinating book, Asa. How can people get it?
Well, it's in all good bookshops. You can buy it online in all good retailers. But probably the best way is to get it straight from the publisher. All Books is orbooks.com, and you can buy it there.
Fantastic. Look forward to it. Thank you very much, Asa Winstanley, an expert on both Israel and the Labour Party and the nexus between the two. Which organization has Israel harmed more? The ICJ or the United Nations itself? It's down to you. You've got about another 20 minutes still to vote. Get your vote in now. Quick break, and then it's your calls all the way to the end of the show. Stay tuned. On the line is a Rose in Texas. Sounds like the beginning of a song. On Californication, which is a song. Rose, welcome to the show.
Fan of the show, transgender fan of the show. And I wanted to briefly address your monologue from last week on Californication, because I almost entirely agree with what you said. Trans women athletes taking medals and records, directing children at nightclubs, and even going to elementary schools themselves, not to mention hormone blockers for children as well. The attack on freedom of speech, not only against conservatives, but anyone who doesn't fall in line with the agenda, rainbow flags on NATO military aircraft, which is certainly doing more to cultivate anti-queer sentiment around the world than there already is. All of that makes me sick. So because I don't believe in incest, bestiality, necrophilia, and pedophilia, I'm basically culturally right-wing by today's standards, even though less than 5 years ago, I'd still be left-wing. So in regards to you and everyone else watching who thinks of me and people like me as the villains right now, you should know that I support the most traditional Muslim, Jewish, Abrahamic believers to be as homophobic and transphobic as they want, because guess what? That's freedom of religion, which is a value we claim to have in the West. Now, my religion, I suppose, is I believe I'm a woman, but guess what? Not everyone has to convert to my religion. Otherwise, we basically have a theocracy, only this theocracy is for the ever-evolving LGBTQIA supercalifragilisticexpialidocious club. So that's all I wanted to get out of my system. Thank you.
Well, Rose, if I could put your call in a glass bottle and ship it around the world, I promise you that I would do so. Crystal clear, beautifully expressed, and I wish you every happiness in life. It is exactly what people who are transgender should be saying. And if they were, they would disappoint the liberal zealots who want to use them as a battering ram against the traditional family values of the rest of us. Beautifully expressed, Rose. I'll never forget it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Back to the lines. Omar is in Sweden on Palestine. I told you it's the global university of the airwaves. Omar, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. I want to begin by saying, Mr. Galloway, I've long admired your passion and dedication to standing up to what you believe in. Your unwavering commitment to fighting for social justice and challenging the status quo has been truly inspiring to me. Of course, I have two questions for you. The first one is, what do you think, how do you see the future relationship between Israel and the broader Middle East evolving, particularly in light of recent geopolitical shifts in the region? And what do you think are the biggest obstacles to achieving a lasting peace between Israel and its neighbors, and how do you propose overcoming them? I would like to hear your thoughts on that, and thank you for accepting my call.
Thank you. I have no anticipation of a solution in my lifetime. I thought there was a moment around the Oslo agreements where maybe if Rabin had not been murdered, maybe it would have taken a different turn, although I doubt it. But I had momentarily, I had the thought that these two states would eventually grow to live with each other, and that Israel would use its undoubted technological and educationally advanced and capital intensive abilities and strength to actually do well for itself across the Arab Middle East, which is 350 million people, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, from Morocco to Bahrain, from ocean to Gulf. That's a big market, and Israel could well have profited from it. But they decided that they could not even live with a mini Palestinian state broken into two parts, like the old South African Bantustans. They murdered the architect of the Oslo Agreement, or the joint architect, their own Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, and they chose instead the path of settlements, illegal settlements, confrontation, bombing, wars, more occupation, and more subversion of Western political systems. That was a mistake by them in the long run, but it has continued for the last 30 years. When it will end, I cannot say. It will certainly have to end by external operation. On the principle that a surgeon cannot operate on his own foot, he can't cut off his own foot, it requires another surgeon from somewhere else to perform that operation. By that I mean that Western leaders will have to end their support for the state of Israel. They'll have to allow and encourage their people to boycott Israel and divest Israel and employ sanctions against Israel. Israel will have to be shunned and ostracized, as apartheid South Africa finally, very belatedly, was. Don't let anyone pretend otherwise. I could show you my scars. But as it eventually was, that will have to happen to Israel. The best people in Israel have already left the country. I know some of them living in Western Europe and increasingly leaving the country because they simply can't go on living in such maniacally frenzied nationalistic polity where Netanyahu's the liberal in his cabinet and all the other ministers are even more savagely extreme than him. No sane or decent person could continue to live in that environment. So more will have to leave. The whole picture of Western and indeed, such as it is, Arab regime support for Israel will have to discontinue. No more weapons, no more arms, no more money. And at that point, the surgeon might be able to operate on the foot of the patient, but not until that point. Thank you, Omar, in Sweden. Jack Plugman writes, no AD, no mortars, just kids in tents, and ships are firing on them. Humankind was rarely this low. When they killed Rabin, all pretensions of Israel being human was gone. This is the dregs of humanity. And Dr. L says, how about calling Russia to help? It was them that liberated the majority of Jews in the Holocaust. Indeed so. Louise Manar, 6025, says the ICJ is located in Holland, and at the same time, Holland supplies Israel with weapons. Go figure, as the Americans say. Breaking news at this time coming from the United States. Oh dear. Reports are coming in of a mass shooting at the Kansas City Chiefs Super Bowl parade. Multiple people, 10 or possibly more, have been injured. It's not known how badly injured the victims are. 2 gunmen have been detained at the scene. Kansas City Chiefs were celebrating their weekend win against the San Francisco 49ers in Las Vegas. Very sorry to hear that news. Warren is on the line in the United States, in Arkansas, and he wants to talk about Joe Biden. Go ahead, Warren.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, George. First, I want to tell you that 4 days ago I had my birthday. Turns out that I'm 6 months, 1 week, and 1 day older than you. So as your elder, I feel it's
all right, old gent.
What's that?
Go on. I said, all right, old gent. Go ahead.
I want to help a young whippersnapper like you to dig deeper. So yes, I'd like to talk first. I have 2 things to talk about. One is Joe Biden. I saw a video this morning, George, and it opened my eyes, and I'd like to share that with you. If you stand back and look, it turns out that Joe Biden is a psyop, a psychological operation. Now, how do I say that? Well, you've had a couple of people on your show today, and they, especially that one guy, I feel so sorry for him. He was saying, why doesn't Joe Biden do, and another person said, why doesn't Joe Biden do? Okay, look, Joe Biden would be lucky if he could tie his shoes in the morning. Okay, the idea that Joe Biden is making any sort of decisions is absurd for anybody that has an IQ greater than 80. Okay, so what's really happened is that we, with the help of mainstream media, they have infantilized the population of the United States and perhaps the world, where people are looking at what is nothing more than a puppet, and they're imagining that this puppet is a real person.
He's a kind of artificial intelligence.
Yes, exactly. He's not real, but everybody's treating him like he's real. And in order to do that, you have to flip your mind and not go along with your lying eyes and pretend that what you're seeing is the real thing when it's not. It's very clever. It's very clever.
Great.
Okay, now
great call, Warren. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Secondarily, with my law background, I want to just fill you in. I've been researching, frankly, I think I can say this on air. I've been researching Jews since 2006, and the anti-Semitism claim is a hoax. And that's why I'm on the air with you, because you have clout, and it's time that we attack this hoax. What I mean specifically is that in law, you can use a thing called conditional acceptance. And so instead of saying that Zionism is not the same as Judaism or whatever, that's a defensive posture. No, I'm encouraging you, young man, to go on the offense. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to, instead of saying no, and being defensive, you turn to the person and you say, I'm happy to accept your claim that I am an anti-Semite. All you need to do is prove to me that you are Semitic. And you see, it turns out, if there's a book you can look up called The 13th Tribe by Arthur Koestler. And he shows, and also you can look it up online with any sort of chat like ChatGPT. The people, the white Ashkenazi Jews in Israel are not Semitic. Their DNA comes from Europe. The original Jews.
Of course. I know all these arguments, and they leave me cold. I'm unmoved by them. I'm not really into DNA-based blood and soil tracing of people's place. What I say is this. You cannot arrive in somebody's country and kick them all out and take their land and their property. You simply can't. Even if you really did 2,000 years before come from there. So I don't care what their DNA is. I know, of course, about mass conversion in Eastern Europe in the 8th century. The Ashkenazi people are clearly a European people. But I don't care about that. I'm a simple guy. You know? I left school at 16. I went to work in a factory making tires. I never did study all these grand theorems. I take the simple view that you cannot go to somebody else's country and steal their things. Still less can you then kick them out of their own country and refuse them the right to return to their own country, even though the law insists that they will forever retain that right, but give somebody else a right of return who cannot remotely claim ever to have been from there, even 2,000 years ago. But whether they could or they couldn't, they have no right to go to somebody else's country and steal their things, their land, their house, and kick them out. So for me, this is a story of European colonialism. Just like the European colonialism which settled your country, Warren, that settled Canada, that settled Rhodesia, or South Africa, or Zambia, the white colonialism that sailed across the world and asserted that they were exceptional, that they were superior, and that they had the right to take other people's things, including their country, their land, and even in the case of slavery, the people themselves. Anti-Semitism is a thing. No, I'm not letting you back in. Anti-Semitism is a thing. It is a thing that led to a Holocaust in Europe, at the hands not of Arabs, not of Muslims, not of Palestinians, at the hands of Europeans who called themselves Christians. And there were many European countries involved in that Holocaust, not just the Nazi Germans, but their allies, and they had many of them. And if the Nazis had arrived here in Britain, they would have found allies here. And the Jews in Britain would have suffered the same fate as the Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe. In Odessa, there were 125,000 Jews living there, creating the Cafe Society, the original Cafe Society, a place of wonderment and learning, a Russian city with 125,000 Jews, the cream of Jewish and the cream of Russian society living there. And when the Red Army liberated Odessa in 1944, there were fewer than 5,000 Jews left in Odessa. The rest had been murdered. Who murdered them? Not Germans. Romanians murdered them. Romanian fascists murdered them. So the Holocaust guilt is shared between Nazi Germany and fascist sympathizers in Ukraine, in Romania, and in many other places, including some new NATO members, like Finland, for example, like Sweden, for example. So anti-Semitism is a real thing. The problem with calling everybody an anti-Semite if they oppose Israel and the crimes it is committing, has committed, is that these real anti-Semites who genuinely do hate Jews, who deny the Holocaust, who would love to start it again, that such people get under the fence. Very real danger in devaluing, bankrupting the words anti-Semitism. Marcus is in Chorley on the line on Rafah. Go ahead, Marcus.
Hello, George and the whole world. The 7th of October attack, I'm a little bit dubious about it, but if it was what it was, then... But the reaction to the 7th of October attack, now I've got a problem with that, because it's genocide, and then you look at what the plans were from 1965 to make a new canal to beat the Suez Canal, so you can get two-way traffic through a canal into the Mediterranean from the Red Sea, and it sort of goes through a lot of the property of Rafah, Gaza, and then you've got the oil rights and drilling rights off the Med coast, off the Gaza coast. Now I'll elaborate on that a little bit later, but I believe this is where they're going. The Ben Gurion Canal is going ahead. What do you think on that, George?
Well, they think. Thanks, Marcus. And I won't be able to let you back in because of the hour and so many people waiting to come on. But these things, no doubt, are factors in this. The gas, the oil, the wish to have a rival to the Suez Canal. But none of these things will come to pass. I confidently assert that the Palestinian people will not be exterminated in Gaza, and that the mass exodus of them into the deserts of Sinai will not occur. The people of Palestine are determined to stay on their land, no matter what the cost, and their children after them, if necessary, will continue to resist and will continue to fight for their rights and their land and their birthright. So I don't believe that canal will ever open. I don't believe that Israel will ever drill or manage to extract a cubic foot or a single barrel of oil off the coast of Gaza, because I have confidence and belief in the Palestinian people's determination and ability to resist. Thanks, Marcus. It's my good wife on the line. I can't keep her waiting any longer. It is Valentine's night, after all, and she's spending it here with me in Rochdale on the television. Happy Valentine's, darling.
Good pleasure. So let's start with the MOATS, the MOATS poll, which asked which organization has Israel harmed more. And your patron Mariam says Israel has harmed all fair-minded people to the depths of our souls. Life can never be the same again after hearing and seeing the atrocities perpetrated against the Palestinians. I can hardly believe that such cold, calculating murder can happen whilst most of the world stays silent. I could not imagine how angry I'm feeling, how inept, how powerless, how forlorn. May God give the victims victory over the oppressors.
You know, I meet people every day, so do you, as we're out in Rochdale. It takes only a moment for tears to appear in their eyes. Whether or not it's a good thing, even the children have phones, and their phones are open all the time, looking at other children, other young people, other mothers being torn apart, children dangling from walls with their legs off, the baby Hind, who was cruelly murdered last week in the taxi. More than I could possibly adumbrate. More than 10,000 children have been murdered, and more than 10,000 mothers have been murdered. And who's lying under the rubble? It's other women and other children that are overwhelmingly lying under the rubble and may never actually be properly counted. Their bodies decomposing, being eaten by animals. It is truly astounding that in 2024 such a thing can A, be happening, and B, nobody is doing anything at all meaningfully to stop it. I mean, King Abdullah of Jordan, he made a wonderful speech yesterday. I've got to hand it to him. In front of Joe Biden. He made a wonderful speech, and a brave one, because he was there in the court of the Sultan. But what is he going to do? What are the others going to do? They all make good statements, not as brave, not as brilliant as King Abdullah of Jordan, but what are they going to do? That is the big question. Sorry, I went on.
Yeah.
What else is happening?
It's just, well, because the thing is that when you think you've seen the worst, another day goes by, you open your social media, and the pictures do get worse. The footage do get worse. I just saw horrific footage of decomposed babies in the Al Nasser hospital. It's unbelievable. And I saw a tweet from Claire Daly saying that every hour 2 Palestinian mothers get killed. I mean, these facts are getting unbelievable. I want to move on to an email from Muzaffar Hussein. He says, without democracy, Earth can never have peace. America is a vetocracy, veto power. Israel is a genocracy with genocidal power. Pakistan is a genocracy with generals' power. And India is a modicracy with Modi's power. Finally, Europe is a NATO-cracy with NATO power. I mean, it's very interesting. What is a democracy?
Very good.
Nowadays?
Hire that writer. Hire that writer.
Speaking of democracies, you know that today is a very special day because my country of origin, the 3rd largest democracy in the world, had its election today with is the biggest single day election in the world, actually, because they not only choose a new president, but also all sorts of legislative representatives on all levels. So they have 10,000 candidates to choose from, imagine. But yeah, so that's happening. And
well done, Indonesia. And it was a peaceful election, apparently. Who's the new president of Indonesia. You care to take a punt on that?
Well, it was already, it doesn't come as a surprise that Prabowo, he was the defense minister to Jokowi, President Jokowi, but prior he stood against Jokowi. This all happens in Indonesia. It's all possible. He stood against Jokowi during the last elections, and then he became defense minister. And this year he stood on the ticket with Jokowi's son, and he is miles ahead. He is expected to have between 55 and 60% of the vote. These are the early polls, but yeah, it's going to be Prabowo and Jokowi's son.
Well, that's very interesting. Anything else? We've got a couple of minutes, maybe.
Yes, I wanted to read you this email from John in Hong Kong. He said, Gigi, isn't it ironic that in 1987, it was then Senator Biden who urged the Senate to ratify the UN treaty against genocide, and they did ratify it. And then in 1999, Senator Biden urged immediate US and NATO military action against the Serbs for genocide and ethnic cleansing in Kosovo and Belgrade, and then Belgrade was bombed for 99 days and nights. Shocking hypocrisy. I can't wait for your victory celebration on February 29th.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, there's genocide and genocide. Some genocides are acceptable to Western powers. Didn't you say to me there was something new about the Pope?
Well, Eileen Siri, she's asking you the question whether it's time for the Pope to use his voice for Rafah.
Yes, it is. I mean, I like this Pope. Not everyone does. I like him. I've always liked him. From his opening speech of his papacy, I liked him. I pray for his health and longer life. And I value what he said so far, but he hasn't said nearly enough. And he hasn't said it nearly firmly enough. You know, the fate of Christian people in Palestine is immensely harmful. So many have been driven out deliberately because they didn't want Christians in Palestine, because that might complicate the message a bit. But at one point in time, 20% of the Palestinian population were Christians, including very eminent ones, like Edward Said, for example, the eminent professor at Columbia in New York, and the great author and intellectual, and many others. So they drove so many Christians out, and the Christians that have remained, including in Bethlehem itself, are ruthlessly persecuted. Their churches bombed, their priests killed, their parishioners killed, in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the response of the Catholic Church has been grossly insufficient. You and I went to a midnight mass where it wasn't even mentioned. This is intolerable. There is an obligation on the Pope to speak more firmly and clearly. And we have a friend who's got him on the phone, so if she's watching, maybe she can ring him up and tell him I said so. Thanks, Gayatri. I'll see you after the show. We might even be able to go out and get a bag of chips together for Valentine's night. Thank you for that roundup. On the line is Scott in San Francisco. He wants to stop the genocide. Go ahead, Scott.
Good afternoon. Good evening. It is an honor to be here, and to follow both of you is amazing. I would like to say a few things. I think we maybe are not really addressing all this, which is most of all the listeners are great people, but we're dealing with people that are absolute psychopaths. Having said that, I like the Lenin quote where he talks about there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. So to save Rafah, we desperately need that to happen. And I think we need short, medium, and long-term goals, like Rochdale, for example. That has to happen. We have to make that happen. But we also, I don't understand why we can't have, you mentioned the Pope, the Bethlehem Christ in the Rubble was just so stirring. Just as stirring as the child, being assassinated, in the car. Everything, what we don't realize is this goes back, this is controversial, but back to the Khazarian mafia, where the Russians came in and finally said, enough of your nonsense of attacking people across Asia. We're going to take care of you. And supposedly they claimed, we're going to get back at you. And that's why they killed the czars in Russia. So we have to think, how can we think differently to attack these people that are such psychopaths? I think they get energy off of people's suffering, especially children. And as heartbreaking that is to say, I think we need to admit that we're dealing with a class of people that project all of their nastiness onto the most loving, caring, giving people in the world, which is the indigenous peoples of Palestine. Those people and those in Africa have always given Jews safe harbor and watched each other's kids.
Yeah, this
right?
is a very good point, that last one, Scott. I'm sorry I have to hurry you on because of the hour. But the last point that you make is not made often enough, that millions of Jews left Europe after the reconquest of Spain and Portugal. And they didn't leave to the west, they left to the south and the east. They left to North Africa, and they left under the protection of the Muslims. And they were protected and lived peacefully, amicably and prosperous alongside the Arab Muslim populations of countries like Morocco, like Algeria, like Tunisia, like Libya. And many Jews ended up in Iran, the world's largest Jewish community outside of Israel is in Iran, and it lives an honored life there, has members of parliament, members in government, members in media, and so on. The Muslims didn't harm the Jews. It was the Christians that harmed the Jews. The anti-Semitism was theirs. Fascism arose from them. And not enough people know that. Scott, thanks for making that point. George, I miss Norma. I hope you still keep in touch, and if so, please ask her to call in again. She wraps up the show nicely, says Ben on email. Well, Norma and us are friends until the end, and she is regularly in touch with us, and we with her, and she frequently brings the show to an end. But I suspect this time it's Prince in Texas on the UK election. I told you, it's a global university of the airwaves. Go ahead, Prince.
Hey, George. How you doing? Much of luck.
By the grace of God, good, thank you.
So, it's the U.S. election. I just have one few things, something to say about that. No mentally sane person can argue that Joe Biden is not even remotely close to being the president running the United States. I mean, he just can take a look at the guy. He barely even knows what day of the week it is. But you can see, if you look at the election polls, it's clear that with this, genocide going on, I don't call it a war, it's genocide going on in Gaza, it is almost clear 100% that he's not going to win. But you see, he's not worried about it. It means there's something that they know that we do not know, and so much for democracy.
Yeah.
So there's something that they know that we don't know, and he's not worried about it. He knows that he's not gonna win. But come that day and that time, he's gonna win. I mean, the fact that he's not worried about it should tell us something. But I digress from there. When I look at the coverage, because I stopped, just watching those videos because, as a dad, I cannot even watch those videos anymore. You see those kids in there. But it tells you something more. There are two good things that have come up from this. There's always a silver lining. The first one is, of course, you can tell my act was born in Africa. We grew up being told about the Western civilization and all those stuff. Like Malcolm X once said, he's never seen Western civilization or Western democracy. He's only seen Western hypocrisy. You see, those are the things that were cloaked to oppress the non-white people of the world. So all those things are things that I've concocted for a while, but this has kind of opened the shade on everybody because we live in an era where everybody can see it. Because if you talk to even people in Africa now, they've seen clearly that there's no such thing as human rights. There's no such thing as Western civilization. All of those things are just euphemisms. They're just useless words that mean nothing. Because, so that's the beautiful thing about this thing about Palestine. because you hear people go on TV and tell you that it's a response to January to October 7th. They don't, but that's assuming that before October 7th everything was okay. Then the last point I have to make, George, is that the problem I have most is with the liberal Zionists and just the Western liberals as a whole, because they're a bunch of hypocrites. You hear them say things like, "Oh, we need to just stop the fighting." That stopping the fighting is not going to stop the problem, because if you stop the fighting without actually addressing the root issue, it's going to come back again. The root of the issue.
You're absolutely right, Prince. Thanks for the call. We've reached the hour. I've lived through so many ceasefires, I couldn't count them. But they're always followed by a resumption of fire and blood and suffering. And so, whilst I hope here in Britain that in the British Parliament next week, when the Scottish National Party, of which I'm not a fan, but they have been the best party in Britain on this question over the last 130 days, they're introducing a motion to Parliament next week demanding an immediate ceasefire. And of course, I hope that it passes, although it will have no meaningful impact even on our own government, never mind on Netanyahu government. But it is symbolic and it should be done. But a ceasefire is necessary but not sufficient. There have been too many ceasefires followed by more horror, terror, suffering. We need a ceasefire and an immediate withdrawal from the Gaza Strip of all Israeli forces. We need a United Nations presence inside the Gaza Strip to make sure that nothing like this can ever happen again. And we need an immediate international conference to found a Palestinian state. We need to begin this operating from outside of this body, because this body is not capable of either resolving the matter or existing without external support. Here's my point. If your country cannot survive without the taxpayers' money from other countries, without the economic, social, cultural acceptance of other countries, if it would wither on the vine and no longer exist, if the US taxpayer didn't send it $3.8 billion every year, if that is your sovereign country, then you are not and cannot be allowed to break international law with the impunity that you have enjoyed thus far. And therefore, Israel will have to change or be changed. Be changed from outside by the people who make it all possible in the first place. So yes, ceasefire now, but don't imagine for a moment that that is sufficient to avoid having to watch all these pictures all over again. Well, it's Valentine's night. Thanks for being with me on such a night. Thanks to my good wife for working with me throughout this show this evening. And I do hope the chip shops are still open and we might even get a chunky chicken. Thanks for being with me. Join me again on Sunday for the mother of all talk shows. And bring another viewer with you. Why don't you? Good night.